Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Joe Seifert. Joe is the CEO of Vertex Hydrogen. Vertex Hydrogen are part of the huge cluster that's happening around HyNet in the north of England, northwest of England. I think it's around, is it the Stanlow terminal infrastructure there. So welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, welcome.
And you're going to be speaking at the World Hydrogen Congress, which is, I think, 9th to the 13th of October in Rotterdam. There's obviously a lot happening across Europe. UK is maybe some specific cases, particularly around the so-called low-carbon hydrogen, or what was previously known in its previous incarnation as blue hydrogen. But we're seeing some exciting news coming out of your projects and the scale and ambition that you're doing there. So maybe we could sort of start around Vertex Hydrogen and helping us understand who you guys are and where do you come from, and then be looking at maybe your initial project in some detail. So yeah, if you want to maybe give us your thumbnail introduction.
Sure, great. Well, at Vertex, we're very proud to be at the forefront of UK low-carbon hydrogen production. So specifically, we are making CCUS-enabled or blue hydrogen at the heart of the HyNet Cluster, which is one of the Track 1 clusters selected by government. And within that, they've picked two large initial projects that will get government support. And we are the one in the northwest. The other one is BP's project in the northeast. And really, the project centers around us taking methane and waste gases from the refinery where we're based, and using the ATR technology of Johnson Matthey, we are then going to produce low carbon hydrogen. We're capturing more than 97% of the CO2. CO2 goes off into the offshore end of life gas field that's run by Eni. And the low carbon hydrogen is being used by big customers, big manufacturers in the northwest, who don't really have an alternative to their current fossil fuels. And they're going to switch from the use of gas to low carbon hydrogen. And the northwest is one of the largest manufacturing regions in the UK, the biggest by employment. And so these large industries that make glass, chemicals, refined products are low-hanging fruit in the decarbonisation story. So within the UK context, where there's a great focus and we expect to be one of the leaders in the world in terms of hydrogen production, we are expected to be the first or one of the first plants.
Excellent. That's a very concise and I guess perfect overview. In terms of the ATR, that technology, autothermal reforming, is I guess it's next generation SMR, and yeah, I think that those capture rates are due to be hit. So I think an exciting project all round in terms of the huge amount of carbon that you're going to be soaking up and delivering and burying in the North Sea. In terms of some of the, I guess, exciting stuff around that infrastructure, there are, I guess, new infrastructure being built. There's probably some risks there. How are you being able to finance that risk? What are some of the challenges, the main challenges you face with being a pioneering project, I guess?
I think so with hydrogen. From a technology perspective, we're not complacent, but we're actually very comfortable. The world has been making hydrogen in a similar way, and actually at the site we're at, it already makes a significant amount of hydrogen. So producing hydrogen and handling it, we're very comfortable with.
Yeah.
Capture rates in the UK, if we don't meet the capture rates, we can't sell the hydrogen as low carbon hydrogen. So that's fundamental to our profile. And then I think the infrastructure that goes with it is obviously critical. The CO2 storage, and then the hydrogen pipelines in particular in the first instance. But we've got very strong partners in HyNet. I think the UK government has a cohesive cluster policy that's actually very supportive. So I'd say there are a whole host of project-related risks that you'd always have, from planning to utilities, but there's nothing in this project that is of a concern to us really in terms of being able to deliver it on time, on budget. Probably the main complexity is it's all a little bit new. And so, and then obviously the government regulatory and support framework, which is advanced in the UK, but still has some way to go, is really the biggest driver. But I got to say, it's quite hard to convey this in an interview, but it's incredibly exciting because we deal with our off-takers and others who see low carbon hydrogen as a way of being the first low-cost glass producer in the world. And a lot of that in this region, there's great buzz and excitement, not just at the C-suite levels, but amongst the overall workforce and others, that this is going to be the first region in the world in the Northwest that will have industrial decarbonisation at scale. Yeah. So plenty of risks, but there's nothing that that we haven't dealt with before in terms of project delivery.
And therefore, I mean, the capital has been allocated, or who are some of the people that are behind Vertex?
Yeah, so I think the Essar, which is a global business that has been in energy and metals and mining and infrastructure for a long time, has a huge focus now on energy transition. They own the Stanlow refinery, which is a strategic asset in the UK. Mm-hmm. That has many ways that can help drive energy transition, from sustainable aviation fuel. It's also itself the biggest CO2 emitter in the Northwest, so a huge opportunity to really reduce emissions from that, as well as being a leader in things like hydrogen. There's a lot of capital available for these kind of projects. I think the critical element at the moment is back to sort of the government regulatory framework and business models which are underpinning this. In the UK, they're based significantly off existing models like offshore wind, which have been successful. So we believe they will be successful, but there is some work to do. And I think capital is really waiting to see what that looks like in terms of timetable and risk before being deployed at scale. But government gets that point, and we feel very good that there's a lot of capital available to support, particularly being the first project is actually a big deal, because most people want to be involved at the very forefront of this exciting new industry.
Yeah. I mean, so I noticed, obviously, beyond your sort of recent work, you have a long history in investment banking. So I guess you're pretty strong on that side of the equation. And I guess from what I could take from you're saying is it's around the policy that's been coming up is investment grade. So investment grade policy is hopefully coming through, which is going to reassure the private finance sector that their investments will produce an ROI. As you mentioned, you've got the off-takers, you've got Essar Oil themselves, their oil refinery, you've got very large glass manufacturer next door, and indeed also the drinks manufacturer Diageo, I think you mentioned as well. So a good cluster of people, and I guess trying to minimize that midstream, so reducing having to move the hydrogen too far.
Yeah, so in the early stage, so one of the challenges with hydrogen is it's expensive to transport without a pipeline, particularly for industrial. So these are enormous industrial sites. They take vast quantities of energy. You really need a pipeline to move the hydrogen to them or be on site. And so we very much see hydrogen as being initially very local, then regional, before it becomes national and international. So that will develop over time. But to your point about the financing of it, I think the main issue is there's different pieces that need to come together at the same time, and then the allocation of risk, which is really driven by government. I think the fundamental question, I think, for everyone is that at the end of the day, using hydrogen is more expensive than our current fuel sources. And so, where is the risk and the reward, and who pays for it is obviously fundamentally important. Government has a key role to play in enabling that, and the private sector is obviously, particularly for the first projects, going to want to see that the risk reward is fair to make it competitive. Mm-hmm. I think offshore wind in the UK has been a great success story where they've got that balance right, and they employed that model. Hydrogen's a little bit different because you end up with a molecule, not with electrons you can just put into the grid. So the offtake story is more important. But again, I feel overall really good that government is very aware that all the pieces need to come together. And there is a good, I think, sensible balance of risk at the moment being discussed between industry, private sector, private investors, and government.
I was interested about what you said before around green hydrogen projects coming online in smaller scale, then blue hitting in, and then green going large scale. And specifically, I guess what you're saying for industrial customers to also, invest and do their own CapEx in fuel switching, they need to have big guaranteed large quantities of hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen, or is that how you see it, that you're enabling that industrial fuel switch? And we might see green hydrogen involved at a smaller scale initially as they begin to ramp up and they have all their challenges in terms of electrolyzer supply chain and some fundamental innovation and technology development to happen.
Yeah, I mean, to give you a sense of scale, so our first 2 plants are about 1 gigawatt of hydrogen. That's the energy equivalent of the use of a city like Liverpool. So it's a big number. In reality, we could sell that to just 2 or 3 large factories. So they are using hundreds of megawatts of 24/7 fuel. And to build pipelines to justify that, you need numbers like we're getting with our first projects, gigawatts of hydrogen, and the first green hydrogen projects in the region, I think the biggest one is about 30 megawatts. So they are really important that they start that industry. But if I need 300 megawatts of hydrogen to make a fuel switch and invest the CapEx and change, 20 or 30 megawatts is not going to move the needle. And also, frankly, from a CO2 capture perspective, so our 2 plants will do about 1.8 million tons of CO2 a year. It's 750,000 cars off the road. These are big numbers. They start making meaningful inroads into the industrial CO2, which is really what the purpose of government policy in doing this is really driven by the numbers. And it's not complicated. We know where the CO2 comes from, but what we can't do is take a teaspoon out of it in the next 5 years is not enough. And I think what we're doing is starting with a shovel and getting going and getting the pipelines going and the big factory switching. Yeah. And once you've got a pipeline, then if you have lots of small projects doing 20 or 30 megawatts here or there, that's also great too. It can just feed into the pipeline. So I think that's how and I think government policy really is focused on getting this off the ground in a pragmatic way.
Yeah, indeed. It's a very well put point. You're actually building some infrastructure that green hydrogen will benefit off. And indeed, I think you said before, you're also looking to get active in doing your own green hydrogen projects.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to do government policies is I think well balanced in the UK on both. You've got to meet the low carbon hydrogen standard, whatever you're making, which is kind of what you should measure. How much CO2 went into how much hydrogen, making sure it's not too much. I think there are challenges, particularly in the Northwest, where the industry is, with doing large-scale green projects. And the biggest one is you need a grid connection. Mm-hmm. And everyone wants a grid connection, and you could wait. There's no way you're getting a grid connection of scale in 2 or 3 years. You might get one in 10 years. So there are natural constraints. That's just one of them. It is challenging to do big green projects where the hydrogen is needed for industry. Mm-hmm. But that, I think, obviously, as the hydrogen infrastructure changes, that will develop and that will change over time, we hope.
Yeah. And timelines for I mean, I assume there's for phase delivery in your gigawatts. Is a first phase, and what year are you targeting?
So, I mean, we expect to take our FID for our first plant next year, mm-hmm. and we expect to be in production in 2027. Right. So, again, based on everything we know, and it's hard to know, we expect to be pretty much the first in the UK and probably at least one of the first large-scale production plants in the world, which is really exciting. The second plant, slightly dependent on government timetable, probably 6 to 12 months behind that. And then we expect to be able to, I mean, someone said churn out gigawatt hydrogen plants, but obviously once we built the first 2, building the next 2 or 3. And we do believe there is, the analysis shows about 4 gigawatts of demand just from sort of big industrial and power users in the Northwest. Mm-hmm. So we think there's actually a lot more we can do. And for the government's target in the UK is 10 gigawatts by 2030. Our ambition over time is to be roughly 40% of that. Yeah. So we are very ambitious based on, frankly, the demand we've got in the region and our position with the refinery as an anchor off-taker, but with land and expertise to deliver it as well.
Yeah. And in terms of the other opportunities, in terms of, I guess it's this generation of CO2 and thinking about CO2, not only in terms of burying it, but as a potential future important carbon that could be used in decarbonising other sectors, so namely aviation, for example, and creating SAF fuel. and binding on a carbon atom into a green hydrogen to produce that sort of e-kerosene. And we've seen obviously from the Refuel EU Act that came in a specific first mandated market for SAF fuels in Europe specifically. Is that how you see the market developing in terms of potential new uses for the CO2 part?
I think initially for our hydrogen for the CO2 we're producing, we will principally just store it in Liverpool Bay because we'll have a very large natural store that we're connected to initially. I do think SAF and e-fuels is going to have a bigger role in transition than we think, because unfortunately at the moment, when I look sort of at the global projects, it feels like there was a great rush of projects and that's been really seriously pared back. And so I think, I do think hydrogen usage in industry is, I think, well established. I think for heavy vehicles and mobility, we're going to see increased hydrogen usage. And then these e-fuels and SAF, I do think will play a significant role. And I think in the broader Essar Energy Transition organization, there'll be great opportunities both with our assets in India, which have great renewable capacity, but also our kind of knowledge of the fuel market. There will be good opportunities. And that will probably be maybe a bigger market than we're expecting as we try and find ways to decarbonize quicker, whilst these big capital projects are moving, but at a slower pace than I think we'd like, and the ambition that we have to decarbonize.
Yeah. And with Essar's home base, you mentioned in terms of it being India, we're seeing, increasing news in terms of I guess the real climate risk that India faces, specifically with heat and the impact it has and the population it has, and it's very, very exposed. Is that beginning to filter through to the higher levels of Indian business and the appetite, I guess, from people like Essar to really get stuck into decarbonisation? Have you seen a sea change of that over the last few months? Or?
I think for a lot of reasons. I mean, India's obviously been a net importer of energy for a long time, and that's a frustration, I think, for a country that's growing so quickly and has such great energy needs. And I think with the increase in renewable energy, renewable power and derivatives from that, India is very blessed with that. And so I think India, when you look at the policy, you really see great support for renewable power and for India's position to be a producer of that, both for its own needs, but also potentially for export. I would add where India does have a great advantage, whilst the climate is similar to other places, that in terms of being able to build projects quickly and efficiently, it's a phenomenal place to actually build projects. Yeah. I think you combine the favorable climate with ability to very cost effectively build and operate large assets. I think you've seen India do that in refining and steel, and this is a natural next step in energy transition to do. So it will be really interesting to see how India and some other countries develop in the seaborne market and how that can with domestic production.
Yeah, that's a good point. You also have a very, very big coastlines. Well, it's been great chatting to you, Joe. Many thanks for sharing your insight. Exciting project happening up there in the northwest of the UK, and we look forward to hearing you speak at the World Hydrogen Congress. As I said, 9th to the 13th of October. As part of World Hydrogen Week, we're also unpicking and unlocking a lot of the granular detail around the derivatives part. So it's going to be a very interesting program this year. So we look forward to you taking part and learning more about Vertex. So many thanks, and stay safe. And I wish you good luck on the project and getting it off the ground.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you guys all in October in Rotterdam. Thank you.
Cheers. Take care.